The diplomatic vessel Starlight Envoy shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Vexus 9. Red warning lights flashed across the control panels. The ship was not supposed to be this close to the moon's surface. Everyone on board knew that Vexus 9 was one of the most dangerous moons in this sector, with its toxic air, extreme temperatures, and deadly wildlife. Engine failure in sectors 3 and 4, called out Flula, the amphibious Moravan engineer. Her webbed hands moved quickly across the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. "We're losing altitude too fast." Ethan Wright, the only human on board, tightened his safety harness. He had been chosen as Earth's representative for this diplomatic mission just 6 months after humanity had joined the Galactic Alliance. Many aliens still viewed humans as weak newcomers who had been allowed to join out of pity rather than merit. Ambassador Krell of the Zolari clicked his mandibles nervously. "Can you regain control?" he asked Flula. The tall, insect-like alien's exoskeleton gleamed under the emergency lights. "Negative," Flula replied, her voice steady despite the danger. "Everyone prepare for emergency landing." Visk, the arthropod-like Tikran scientist, made a high-pitched sound of distress. "The atmosphere on Vexus 9 will kill us within minutes. If our environmental systems fail." "They won't fail," said Sentinel Jarden, the crystalline security officer. His body sparkled as light reflected off the thousands of living crystal formations that made up his form. "The ship's core systems are designed to survive impact." Ethan said nothing. As the newest species to join the Alliance, humans were expected to listen and learn, not offer suggestions. But he mentally went through the crash procedures he had learned during his training on Earth. He checked his personal survival kit strapped to his belt, making sure it was secure. The ship dropped like a stone through the last layer of clouds. The surface of Vexus 9 came into view, a barren landscape of sharp rocks and strange purple vegetation. "Brace for impact!" Flula shouted. Ethan tucked his head down, crossed his arms over his chest, and tensed his muscles. The ship hit the ground with tremendous force. Metal tore, glass shattered, the lights went out. Ethan felt himself thrown against his harness, then something hard hit his head, and everything went black. When Ethan regained consciousness, his first sensation was pain. His head throbbed, and he could feel warm blood trickling down his temple. His ribs hurt when he breathed, suggesting they might be bruised or cracked. The air around him tasted strange. The ship's air filtration must be damaged. He blinked several times, trying to clear his vision. The cabin was dark except for a few sparking wires and the dim emergency lights. Smoke filled the air. Ethan unbuckled his harness with shaking hands and fell forward onto the tilted floor. The ship had landed at an angle. "Hello?" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Is anyone conscious?" No answer came. Ethan crawled toward the nearest figure, Ambassador Krell. The Zolari was still strapped into his seat. His exoskeleton cracked in several places. Green fluid leaked from the wounds. Ethan checked for vital signs the way he had been taught for Zolari physiology. The ambassador was alive but unconscious. One by one, Ethan checked the other crew members. Visk was in the worst shape, with one of his limbs completely severed. Flula was bleeding from her gills but still breathing. Sentinel Jarden had several crystal shards broken off from his body, but his core remained intact. The ship groaned around them. Ethan smelled fuel and heard the hiss of escaping gas. They needed to get to a safer section of the ship immediately. Despite his injuries, Ethan began to move his alien companions. He dragged Ambassador Krell first, pulling him toward the central chamber, which appeared more intact. The Zolari was heavy, nearly twice Ethan's weight, but adrenaline gave the human strength. Next came Flula, then the fractured form of Jarden. Visk was the most difficult to move. The Tikran scientist had a complex exoskeleton that could easily be damaged further. Ethan tore strips from his own uniform to create a makeshift stretcher and carefully moved the injured alien. By the time Ethan had all 4 aliens in the central chamber, his body was screaming in protest. Blood soaked through his uniform in several places where he had torn open his own wounds during the exertion. The toxic atmosphere was starting to affect his lungs, making each breath painful. He knew he needed to secure the chamber against the moon's atmosphere. The ship's environmental systems were failing. He could hear the air scrubbers making an unhealthy whining noise. Using debris from the crash, Ethan sealed the worst of the breaches. It wouldn't last forever, but it might buy them time. Next, he searched for the emergency medical kit. Every diplomatic vessel carried supplies for all known sentient species. He found it beneath a collapsed panel and began treating the most severe injuries. First Visk's severed limb, applying pressure and a coagulant. Then the cracks in Krell's exoskeleton, sealing them with medical adhesive. He flushed Flula's gills with clean water from his own rations and carefully picked debris from Jarden's crystal matrix. Only when the aliens were stable did Ethan tend to his own wounds. A deep cut on his forehead, 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder that he gritted his teeth and pushed back into place with a muffled cry of pain. Burns on his hands from touching exposed wiring. He worked methodically, cleaning and bandaging what he could. Hours passed. Ethan searched the wreckage for anything useful: emergency rations, communication devices, weapons. Most systems were damaged beyond repair, but he managed to salvage some food, water purifiers, and a partial map of the surrounding area. As night fell on Vexus 9, the temperature dropped rapidly. Ethan set up heating units around his still unconscious companions. He checked their vital signs regularly, adjusting their positions to prevent additional stress on their injuries. Ambassador Krell was the first to regain consciousness. The Zolaris' compound eyes flickered open, taking in the makeshift shelter Ethan had created within the central chamber. "We survived?" Krell asked, his translator making his clicking speech understandable. "The ship didn't," Ethan replied, helping the ambassador into a sitting position. "But yes, we survived. For now." One by one, the others regained consciousness: Flula, Visk, and finally Jarden. They were confused at first, then shocked as they realized what had happened, and who had saved them. "How are you even alive?" Visk asked Ethan, his translator conveying genuine bewilderment. "Your species has no natural armor, no backup respiratory system, no temperature regulation beyond your primitive sweat mechanism." Ethan shrugged, wincing at the pain the simple gesture caused. "Humans are tougher than we look." The aliens exchanged glances. There was disbelief in their expressions, but also something new, a hint of respect. A loud screech came from outside the ship, echoing through the hull. Everyone froze. "Vexian stalkers," whispered Flula, her amphibious eyes wide with fear. "They hunt at night." "We need to stay quiet and hope they pass us by," Krell said. "Our only chance is to wait for rescue." Another screech, closer this time. Something large moved past one of the few intact viewports, a shadow with too many limbs. "Beacon," Jarden said suddenly. Did anyone activate the distress beacon? Silence fell over the group as they realized no one had. "I'll go," Ethan said, standing up despite his injuries. "The beacon control is in the front section, right?" "You cannot," Krell protested. "The front section is exposed to the atmosphere. Even if the stalkers don't get you, the toxic air will." Ethan picked up a broken piece of metal that resembled a club. "I'll be quick." Before any of them could argue further, he was gone, slipping through a damaged doorway into the darkness beyond. The aliens looked at each other in confusion and growing concern. "Did he not understand about the atmosphere?" Visk asked. "His species cannot survive more than a few minutes of direct exposure." "He understood," Flula said quietly. "He went anyway." Outside, they heard another screech from a stalker, followed by a very human shout of defiance. And that was when they first began to wonder if they had underestimated the human race. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The aliens grew more anxious with each moment. According to everything they knew about human physiology, Ethan should not have survived this long in the toxic atmosphere of Vexus 9. "We should have stopped him," Ambassador Krell said, his mandibles clicking with distress. "It was suicide." "He knew the risks," Sentinel Jarden replied, the living crystals of his body dimming with what seemed like sadness. "He chose to try anyway." A loud bang came from the outer hull, making them all jump. then another. Something was hitting the ship from outside. Flula dragged herself to a damaged viewport, her amphibious body still weak from her injuries. She peered out into the darkness of Vexus 9's night. "I don't believe it," she whispered. "It's him." The others crowded around the viewport. Outside, illuminated by the strange purple glow of the moon's vegetation, was Ethan. His face was covered by a makeshift mask torn from the ship's emergency supplies. He was dragging something heavy behind him while fending off a Vexian stalker with a metal pipe. The stalker was twice Ethan's size, with 6 limbs ending in sharp claws and a mouth full of needle-like teeth. It lunged at the human, who dodged with surprising speed despite his injuries. Ethan swung the pipe, connecting with the creature's head. The stalker screeched in pain and backed away a few steps. "He's trying to reach the airlock," Visk realized. "That's the beacon module he's dragging." Krell moved as quickly as his injured body allowed, reaching the airlock controls. He hesitated only briefly before opening the outer door. If the human was somehow still alive, they couldn't abandon him now. Ethan saw the airlock open and made a final dash toward it, dragging the heavy beacon module. The stalker pursued, closing the distance quickly. At the last moment, Ethan turned and thrust the metal pipe directly into the creature's open mouth. The stalker reeled back, giving Ethan just enough time to throw himself and the beacon module into the airlock. Krell slammed his hand on the controls. The outer door closed just as the stalker crashed against it, leaving dents in the metal. When the inner door finally opened, Ethan collapsed onto the floor. His skin was red and blistered, where it had been exposed to the atmosphere. Blood seeped through his makeshift mask. His breathing came in ragged gasps. "Water," he croaked. Flula quickly brought him a container of purified water. Ethan drank deeply, then pulled off his mask with shaking hands. His face was severely irritated, with chemical burns around his eyes and mouth. "Beacon's damaged," he said between labored breaths. "But I think I can fix it." The aliens stared at him in stunned silence. "How are you alive?" Visk finally asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his shock. "The atmosphere contains levels of chlorine gas that should have dissolved your lung tissue within minutes." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Humans have a history with chlorine gas. Old wars on Earth. Our bodies can handle it better than you'd, think. Not pleasant, though." He coughed violently, spitting blood onto the floor. "You need medical attention," Krell said, concerned despite himself. "Later," Ethan replied, turning his attention to the beacon module. "This is more important." For the next hour, Ethan worked on the damaged beacon. His hands were steady despite his injuries. Occasionally he would stop to cough up blood or drink more water, but he never complained. The aliens watched in fascination and growing respect. "Your organs must be severely damaged," Visk observed. "How are you functioning?" Ethan shrugged as he reconnected a damaged circuit. "Adrenaline, it's a human hormone, keeps us going when we need to. I'll pay for it later." "You saved the beacon," Flula said. "But at what cost to yourself?" "Worth it," Ethan replied simply. "No other choice. We all die if no one comes for us." As they watched him work, the aliens began to see the human in a new light. What they had mistaken for fragility was perhaps something else entirely. "On my world," Krell said slowly, "we have a saying, true strength is revealed in crisis. I believe I understand it better now." Ethan didn't respond. He was focused entirely on the beacon module, rewiring damaged components and bypassing failed systems. Finally, a small green light began to blink. "Got it," he said, satisfaction clear in his voice despite his pain. "Signals transmitting. Now we wait." He tried to stand but stumbled. Jarden moved quickly, catching the human before he fell. "You've done enough," the crystalline being said. "Rest now." For once, Ethan didn't argue. He allowed Jarden to help him to a makeshift bed they had created from salvaged padding. As soon as he lay down, his body seemed to give in to the injuries and toxins. His breathing became shallow, his skin pale beneath the chemical burns. Will he survive? Flula asked Visk quietly. The Tikran scientist studied the human with his compound eyes. By all standard medical knowledge, he should already be dead. But I'm beginning to think humans don't conform to standard knowledge. Throughout the night, they took turns watching over Ethan. His condition worsened. Fever set in. The chemical, burn spread. His lungs rattled with fluid. Yet somehow he kept breathing. Near dawn, Ethan regained consciousness briefly. He found Ambassador Krell sitting beside him. The beacon? Ethan asked weakly. Still transmitting, Krell assured him. Rest. Ethan shook his head slightly. If rescue doesn't come soon, you need a plan. The stalkers will be back. Probably more of them. We will handle that when necessary, Krell said. No, Ethan insisted. Plan now, while you can. Never wait for a crisis. His eyes fluttered closed again as he slipped back into unconsciousness. Krell sat quietly, considering the human's words. They made sense. The Zolari called the others together. The human is right, he told them. We need to prepare for the possibility that rescue will not arrive quickly. What can we do? Flula asked. We're all injured. The ship is crippled, and this moon is hostile to all of us. Not all of us equally, Visk pointed out. The human has shown remarkable resilience if he survives. We should not rely on him, Jarden interrupted. He has done more than could be expected already. Krell clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps that is the lesson here. We must each do more than expected. As the alien light of Vexus 9's sun began to filter through the damaged ship, they heard a sound that made them all freeze, the distinctive screech of Vexian stalkers. But this time it wasn't just one. It sounded like a pack. They're hunting together, Flula whispered in horror. That's rare behavior for stalkers. They smelled blood, Visk said. Our blood. And his. He gestured toward Ethan. The human stirred at the sound, his survival instincts pulling him back to consciousness despite his condition. He tried to sit up. How many? He asked, his voice barely audible. Too many. Krell replied honestly. Rest. We will handle this. Ethan looked at each of them, injured, afraid, but determined. Something like pride flickered in his eyes. Together, he said. We handle it together. And as the stalkers began to circle the crashed ship, the 5 survivors prepared to face them as a united group, no longer divided by species or preconceptions, but bound by a shared will to survive. The Vexian stalkers circled the crashed ship, their 6-legged bodies moving with predatory grace. There were 7 of them now, communicating with low hisses and screeches. They clawed at the hull, searching for weak points. Inside, Ethan and the aliens prepared for battle. Despite his severe injuries, Ethan was on his feet, leaning heavily against a wall for support. They're intelligent hunters, he said, his voice rough from the damage to his lungs. They remember I hurt one of them. They won't give up easily. The hull won't hold forever, Flula said, checking the integrity of their shelter on a damaged control panel. The crash weakened too many sections. Krell handed out makeshift weapons they had created from the wreckage, metal pipes, sharp pieces of hull plating, tools that could double as weapons. Ethan took a long metal rod that resembled a spear. We need to thin their numbers, Ethan said. Make them think we're too dangerous to be worth the effort. Visk looked at the human with concern. You can barely stand. You should rest while we defend the ship. Ethan shook his head. I've fought in worse shape. On Earth, I was part of a survival expedition in the Antarctic when our shelter collapsed. 3 days with a broken leg before rescue came. The aliens exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand that human history was filled with stories of survival against impossible odds. A loud crash came from the rear of the ship. Metal tore as one of the stalkers found a weak point in the hull. They're breaking through, Jarden shouted, his crystalline body glowing brighter with alarm. Ethan pushed himself away from the wall, standing straight despite the pain evident in his face. Krell, Jarden, take the rear breach. Flula, watch the airlock. Visk and I will guard this chamber. The aliens moved to their positions without question. They had seen enough to trust Ethan's judgment. The first stalker squeezed through the breach in the rear section. Krell and Jarden were waiting.
The ambassador's powerful mandibles snapped at the creature, while Jarden's crystalline form reflected the dim light, temporarily blinding the stalker with brilliant flashes. In the central chamber, Ethan heard the sounds of combat. "Stay alert," he told Visk. They might be creating a distraction. As if on cue, the ceiling above them buckled. 2 stalkers had climbed onto the ship's hull and were tearing through from above. Ethan raised his makeshift spear just as the first stalker dropped into the chamber. The creature lunged at Visk, seeing the injured scientist as the easier target. But Ethan moved with surprising speed, driving his spear into the stalker's side. The creature screeched in pain and turned its attention to Ethan. "Now, Visk," Ethan shouted. The Tikran scientist activated a piece of salvaged equipment they had prepared, a broken energy cell rigged to discharge. He threw it at the wounded stalker. The cell exploded with a burst of electricity, sending the creature into convulsions. The second stalker dropped through the ceiling hole. Ethan was ready, but his injured body betrayed him. He stumbled, his reaction too slow. The stalker's claws raked across his chest, tearing through his uniform and into flesh. Ethan cried out in pain but didn't fall. Instead, he drove his spear up into the stalker's throat with such force that the metal punctured through the other side. The creature thrashed violently, then went still. Blood soaked through Ethan's uniform, adding to his already numerous injuries. He pulled his spear free from the dead stalker and turned to check on Visk. "You okay?" he asked, breathing heavily. Visk nodded, his compound eyes fixed on Ethan with a mixture of concern and amazement. "Your blood. You're losing too much." "Had worse," Ethan muttered, though he looked pale. "Check on the others." From the rear of the ship came more sounds of combat, then silence. Moments later, Krell and Jarden returned to the central chamber. The ambassador's exoskeleton was dented in places, and Jarden had lost more crystal shards, but they were alive. 2 stalkers down, Krell reported. The others retreated when they saw their packmates fall. "They'll be back," Ethan said, leaning on his spear for support. "With a new strategy. They learn." Flula joined them from her position at the airlock. "The beacon is still transmitting, but we have no way to know if anyone received our signal." Ethan nodded grimly. "We need a new plan. This position isn't defensible anymore." He moved to a viewport and looked out at the alien landscape of Vexus 9. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, rose a formation of rocky cliffs. "There," he said, pointing. "High ground. Caves, maybe. Better position." "You want us to leave the ship?" Visk asked, alarmed. "In our condition? Through open terrain? With stalkers hunting us?" "If we stay, we die," Ethan said simply. "Ship's too damaged. Air filters failing. Power almost gone. And now the hull is breached in multiple places." The aliens couldn't argue with his logic, but the prospect of leaving their shelter was frightening.
"How will rescue find us if we leave the beacon?" Flula asked. Ethan thought for a moment, then looked at the dead stalkers. "We take the beacon with us, and we use these." He began stripping equipment from the creatures' bodies. Tough hide. That could serve as protective clothing, claws that could be fashioned into tools, teeth that could become weapons.
"Stalker hide will help protect against the atmosphere," he explained as he worked. "Not perfect, but better than nothing." The aliens watched, then began to help. They had never considered using the predators this way. Their species had advanced beyond such primitive survival techniques long ago. But watching Ethan work reminded them that sometimes old methods were still valuable. As they prepared to leave the ship, Ethan showed them how to wrap stalker hide around exposed skin, how to create masks to filter the toxic air, how to use the creature's sinew as binding material. On Earth, he told them as he worked, ancient humans used every part of the animals they hunted. Nothing wasted. Survival depends on resourcefulness. By the time they were ready to move out, all 5 of them were wearing makeshift protection crafted from the stalkers. The beacon module had been stripped down to its essential components and fitted into a pack that Jarden would carry. Ethan,
had fashioned weapons for each of them suited to their physiologies. "Stay close," Ethan instructed as they prepared to leave through the airlock. "Move quietly. Watch each other's backs." "What if the remaining stalkers find us in the open?" Krell asked. "Then we fight," Ethan replied. "Together." As the airlock opened and the harsh atmosphere of Vexus 9 rushed in, Ethan led them out onto the alien surface. His wounds still bled. His lungs still burned with each breath, but his steps were steady. The 4 aliens followed him, watching as this supposedly fragile human pushed through pain that would have incapacitated many of their kind. They began to understand something that humans had known throughout their history, that survival wasn't always about physical strength or natural advantages, but about the refusal to give up. As they made their way toward the distant cliffs, Ambassador Krell moved up beside Ethan. "When we return to galactic space," the Zolari said quietly, "I will recommend a reassessment of humanity's classification. Your species deserves more respect than it has been given." Ethan smiled faintly. "First, we have to survive long enough to get back." Behind them, the distant cries of stalkers echoed across the barren landscape. The hunt was not over. The journey across the open terrain of Vexus 9 was grueling. Ethan led the group, setting a pace that balanced their need for speed with their injuries. The makeshift protection from the stalker hides helped shield them from the worst of the
toxic atmosphere, but they could all feel the effects of exposure. Visk struggled the most.
The Tikran scientist's arthropod body was designed for precision work, not endurance. When he began to fall behind, Ethan dropped back to help him. "I cannot maintain this pace," Visk admitted. His breathing labored. "My species evolved in controlled environments. We are not made for this." "Neither are humans," Ethan said, supporting the alien with his shoulder. "We're just stubborn." "How much further to the cliffs?" Flula called from ahead. "Less than a mile," Ethan replied. "But we need to hurry. Look." He pointed to the horizon behind them. Dark clouds were gathering, moving quickly in their direction. "Acid storm," Jarden said, his crystalline body dimming with concern. "The chemical composition in Vexus 9's atmosphere creates highly corrosive precipitation. It will damage even my crystal matrix." They increased their pace despite their exhaustion. Ethan continued to support Visk, practically carrying the scientist at times. The rocky cliffs grew closer, their shadowy openings promising shelter from both the approaching storm and any pursuing stalkers. "Almost there," Ethan encouraged them, though his own strength was fading. The blood from his chest wound had soaked through the makeshift bandages. His face was pale beneath the chemical burns, and his breathing was becoming more labored. When they reached the base of the cliffs, Krell and Jarden scouted ahead, looking for a suitable cave. They found one about 20 feet up, accessible by a narrow path. "This will provide adequate shelter," Krell reported, "and it's defensible." Getting up to the cave was another challenge. The path was steep and crumbling in places. Ethan went last, making sure the others made it safely before attempting the climb himself. By the time he reached the cave entrance, the first drops of the acid rain were beginning to fall, sizzling when they hit the ground. Inside, the cave extended about 30 feet back into the cliff face. It was dry and relatively clean, with a high ceiling that allowed even Krell to stand comfortably. Most importantly, it was sheltered from Vexus 9's hostile environment. Ethan set up the beacon near the cave entrance, where its signal would have the best chance of reaching space. Then he collapsed against the wall, his body finally giving in to exhaustion and injury. "The human needs medical attention," Visk said urgently. "His wounds are severe, and I believe he has been ignoring symptoms of toxic exposure." Flula knelt beside Ethan, examining his injuries with growing concern. "His body temperature is dangerously high, and there's a strange discoloration spreading from his chest wound."
"Infection," Ethan mumbled, his eyes half closed. "Different bacteria here. My immune system doesn't recognize it." Outside, the acid rain fell harder, creating a curtain of deadly precipitation that cut them off from the world beyond. The storm would trap them in the cave for hours, perhaps days. "We need to clean his wounds properly," Krell said. "Use some of our water supply."
Working together, the aliens tended to Ethan's injuries as best they could. They cleaned the chest wound, which was turning an alarming shade of purple around the edges. They treated his chemical burns with a soothing gel from Flula's medical pack. They gave him water and emergency rations to help his body fight the infection. Through it all, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he shared survival knowledge, how to conserve water, how to maintain body heat, how to stay alert for threats.
When he slept, he sometimes spoke in his native language, words the translators couldn't catch. "He's fighting hard," Jarden observed, "but I fear this is one battle he cannot win without proper medical facilities." As night fell on Vexus 9, the
acid rain continued to fall. The temperature dropped rapidly, forcing the group to huddle together for warmth. They took turns keeping watch, though they all knew the real danger was not outside the cave, but within Ethan's body. In the darkest part of the night, Ethan's condition worsened. The infection spread visibly beneath his skin, dark tendrils reaching from the chest wound toward his heart. His breathing became shallow and irregular. "I have never seen a pathogen act this way," Visk said, his scientific mind still analyzing, despite their dire situation. "It's as if it's specifically targeting his circulatory system." "Can we help him?" Flula asked. Visk hesitated. "There is something we could try. It's experimental and dangerous, but it might work." He explained that Tikran blood contained powerful antibiotic properties that had evolved to fight the many parasites of their homeworld. In theory, a small amount could help Ethan's body recognize and fight the alien infection. But human biology is different, Krell pointed out. "It could kill him." "He will die anyway if we do nothing," Visk replied simply. They debated the risks, then decided to try. With Ethan's barely conscious consent, Visk extracted a small amount of his own bluish blood and, using a medical injector from the emergency supplies, administered it near Ethan's wound. For hours, nothing seemed to change. Ethan's fever remained high, his breathing labored. The infection continued its slow spread. Then, just as dawn approached, something unexpected happened. The dark tendrils beneath his skin stopped advancing. "It's working," Visk said with surprise. "His body is using the compounds in my blood to fight the infection." By morning, Ethan's fever had broken. The infection was receding, the purple discoloration fading to a less alarming blue. He was able to sit up and drink water on his own. "Thank you," he said to Visk. "That was quick thinking." "I simply applied what I observed," the scientist replied. "Your body has remarkable adaptive capabilities. Most species would have rejected foreign blood completely, but yours used what it needed and is neutralizing the rest." Outside, the acid rain had stopped. Sunlight filtered into the cave, bringing a small measure of warmth. The beacon continued to transmit, its steady blinking a reminder of their hope for rescue. "How long do you think before someone picks up our signal?" Flula asked. "Hard to say," Ethan replied, "but someone will come. Diplomatic vessels are high priority." Ambassador Krell moved to sit beside Ethan. "While we wait, perhaps you could tell us more about your home planet. I find I'm curious about the conditions that produced such a resilient species." Ethan smiled weakly. "Earth isn't as harsh as this place, but it has its challenges. We have deserts hotter than this, oceans deeper than you can imagine, mountain ranges that reach into the clouds." As he spoke about Earth, its diverse environments, its unpredictable weather, its long history of conflict and cooperation, the aliens listened with growing interest. They began to understand how humans had developed their unique combination of physical endurance and mental adaptability. "And yet your species is so young compared to ours," Jarden noted.
"The galactic records show humans have only been spacefaring for a few centuries." "We're quick learners," Ethan said. "Had to be." Their conversation was interrupted by a faint but familiar sound, the screech of a Vexian stalker. The remaining predators had tracked them to the cliffs.
The screeches of the Vexian stalkers grew louder. From the cave entrance, the group could see 3 of the predators climbing the cliff face, their 6 legs finding holds in the rock with disturbing ease. "They're persistent," Krell said, picking up his makeshift weapon. "I'll give them that." Ethan tried to stand but was still too weak from fighting the infection. "We need to block the entrance," he said. "Make it narrow enough that they can only come in one at a time." The aliens quickly gathered loose rocks from the cave floor, piling them to create a partial barrier across the entrance. Behind this barricade, they prepared for battle. "Remember, aim for their throats or eyes," Ethan instructed, propping himself up against the wall. "That's where they're most vulnerable." The first stalker reached the cave entrance, its teeth glistening with saliva as it approached the barrier. It paused, studying the obstacle and the defenders behind it. Then it let out a loud screech, signaling to the others. "It's calling the pack," Flula warned. "They're planning something." The stalker suddenly lunged forward, smashing into the rock barrier with its full weight. Stones tumbled inward as the barricade partially collapsed. Before it could push all the way through, Krell and Jarden attacked together, driving their weapons into the creature's face. It thrashed wildly, then went still. "One down," Jarden said, his crystal form glowing with the exertion. "But the barrier is weakened." They quickly tried to rebuild the barrier, but they were too slow. The second stalker was already at the entrance, pushing through the gap. Behind it, they could see the third, and beyond that, more shapes climbing the cliff. "There are too many," Fisk said, fear evident in his voice. "We can't hold them all off." Ethan looked around the cave desperately, seeking any advantage. His eyes fell on the beacon, still blinking steadily near the entrance. "The beacon," he said suddenly. "It has a power cell. If we overload it," Flula understood immediately. "It would create an electromagnetic pulse. It might disorient the stalkers." "Get ready to fight," Ethan told the others as he crawled toward the beacon. "This will only give us a short advantage." As the second stalker broke through the barrier, Krell met it head-on, his powerful mandibles locking around one of the creature's limbs. Jarden and Flula attacked from the sides while Visk stayed back, protecting Ethan as he worked on the beacon. Using the tools they had salvaged from the ship, Ethan quickly reconfigured the beacon's power settings. His hands moved with practiced efficiency despite his weakness. "Almost there," he muttered as the sounds of combat filled the cave. "Just need to—" A sudden cry of pain made him look up. Jarden had been caught by a stalker's claws, and several crystal shards had been torn from his body. The sentinel staggered back, his glow dimming. "Now, Ethan!" Krell shouted as a third stalker pushed into the cave. Ethan completed the final connection and pressed the emergency override. The beacon emitted a high-pitched whine, then flashed blindingly bright. A wave of energy pulsed outward, making the air itself seem to ripple. The effect on the stalkers was immediate. They screeched in confusion, their movements becoming erratic. Some clawed at their own heads as if in pain. "Attack now," Ethan called out. The aliens pressed their advantage, driving the disoriented stalkers back toward the cave entrance. One fell from the cliff path screeching as it tumbled to the ground far below. Another was wounded badly enough to retreat. The third was cornered and quickly dispatched by Krell and Flula working together. "It worked," Visk said with relief. "But we lost the beacon." Ethan nodded grimly. "Had to be done. Besides, it already sent our location. If anyone picked up the signal, they know where to find us." They rebuilt the barricade more solidly this time, using parts of the dead stalker to reinforce it. Then, they tended to Jarden's injuries. The crystalline being had lost significant portions of his outer layer, but his core remained intact. "I will recover," Jarden assured them. "My species can regrow our crystal matrix given time and proper minerals." As the day wore on, they took turns keeping watch at the barricade. The stalkers did not return immediately, but they could occasionally hear distant screeches echoing across the rocky landscape. Ethan's condition continued to improve thanks to Visk's blood transfusion. The human's remarkable immune system was adapting to the foreign biology, using it to fight off the Vexus 9 infection. "Your species is full of surprises," Visk told him. "Most life forms in the galaxy are highly specialized, adapted to specific conditions, but humans seem to be generalists. Jack of all trades, master of none," Ethan replied with a small smile. "It's an old Earth saying. We're not the strongest, fastest, or smartest, but we can handle a little bit of everything." As night fell, again on Vexus 9, the temperature in the cave dropped significantly. They huddled together for warmth, taking comfort in each other's presence. Despite their different physiologies and backgrounds, they had formed a bond through their shared struggle for survival. "If we get rescued," Flula said during her watch, "what will you do when you return to galactic space, Ethan?" "First,
Stay in a medical facility," he joked weakly. "Then back to diplomatic service, I suppose. Someone needs to represent humanity out there."
"You have represented your species quite effectively here," Krell said. "I admit when Earth was first granted membership in the Alliance, many of us questioned the decision. Humans seemed underdeveloped compared to other species." "And now?" Ethan asked.
"Now I understand that we were measuring by the wrong standards," the ambassador replied. "Physical strength and technological advancement are not the only metrics of value." Their conversation was interrupted by a new sound, not the screech
Of stalkers, but a low humming that seemed to come from above. It grew louder, and a bright light suddenly shone into the cave entrance. "A ship!" Fisk exclaimed, moving to look outside. Through the gaps in their barricade, they could see a rescue vessel hovering above the cliffs. A spotlight swept across the landscape, searching. "They found us," Flula said, her voice filled with relief. "The beacon signal worked," Ethan laughed weakly. "Told you someone would come." They dismantled enough of their barricade to signal the rescue ship with reflected light. Soon, armed rescue personnel in full environmental suits descended from the vessel. The stalkers, intimidated by the larger predator in their territory, kept their distance. As the rescue team helped them aboard the ship, Ethan was placed on a medical stretcher. A doctor immediately began treating his numerous injuries. "I'm surprised you're still alive," the doctor said, scanning Ethan's body. "These readings, the toxin levels alone should have been fatal." "You'll find humans are full of surprises," Ambassador Krell said, standing nearby. "This one especially." Once they were safely aboard the rescue vessel and receiving proper medical treatment, the 5 survivors gathered in the ship's medical bay. Their injuries were being treated, their bodies finally able to rest after days of constant stress and danger. "I have transmitted a preliminary report to the Galactic Council," Krell informed them, "including a recommendation for a formal reassessment of human capabilities and status within the Alliance." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is that good or bad?" "Very good," the ambassador replied. "I have suggested that humans be reclassified as a high-resilience species and that your diplomatic corps be expanded to include more challenging environments. And I have requested permission to collaborate with Earth scientists on a study of human adaptability," Fisk added. "Your immune system alone could revolutionize our understanding of cross-species medical treatments." As the rescue ship broke, free of Vexus 9's atmosphere and accelerated toward galactic space, Ethan looked at his 4 companions, aliens who had once viewed humans as weak, primitive creatures barely worthy of notice. Now they looked at him with respect, even admiration. "So," he said with a tired smile, "same time next year?" The aliens stared at him in shock before realizing he was joking. Then one by one they began to laugh, each in their own way but united in their shared experience and newfound understanding. And as stars streaked past the viewports, Ethan knew that something important had changed in the relationship between humans and the wider galactic community. Sometimes it took a crash on a hostile moon to reveal the truth about what a species was really made of.